It's going to feel like the.
Fab. Am I good to go, Darren?
We'll just give it a couple more seconds. I think everyone's
Sure.
in.
Just let me know. But oh, here's some other folks arriving. Great.
Okay, it's quarter past now. So I would like to welcome our third and final keynote of the conference this year, Kirsten MacQuarrie. So I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very
Fantastic.
much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to see so many of you here. And yes, I will be sharing a book that is almost as good as ice cream. I don't know whether those of you who've been following the raffle discussions in the chat there, I can promise it's almost as tasty. Certainly a lot of tasty tidbits for all of those. And I think that's pretty much everyone in the room, the fact that you're here today, who care about the case and the evidence base for feminist librarianship. Now, as many of you will know, Feminist Librarianship is new on the shelves. It launched in Women's History Month this year, March 2026. But its foundations are actually half a decade in the making. So not long after I started at CILIP Scotland, I am Sector Development Manager there, I founded the Winspiration programme. So this has been an ongoing series of webinars, workshops, recommended readings, provocations, and you might have seen in the subtitle of Feminist Librarianship, provocations also make a spiky appearance there. Our first webinar ever was led by the amazing Dr. Adele Patrick, co-founder and co-director of Glasgow Women's Library, which also makes a well-earned appearance in the book. And Adele's provocation to attendees on that day was, what would libraries led by feminists look like? And that is a question that I think is going to be at the forefront of our minds today. To be honest, it felt very much, as Adele shared these insights, that the floodgates opened. We were inviting contributions from Padlet, contributions in the room, and it was so apparent that there's so much work to be done, but also so much goodwill, so much energy for making our libraries a better, more equitable space for women on both sides of the desk. So there have been many highlights of Winspiration so far, but one particularly close to my heart was the Not Our Job campaign. This took place on the 25th of November 2022, which, as some of you will know, is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. I remember the researcher whose work was at the core of this, Brooke Canby, is a previous CALC presenter. And we were dealing with the fact that her research had indicated that sexual harassment in libraries is more prevalent than had been realised. And I'm sure everybody in the room agrees that even one incident is one too many. So as a result of that campaign, CILIP Scotland became the first professional association in Europe to take a public stand against harassment in libraries. And you can see my quote from the webinar here. As women, of course, it is not our job to endure harassment in our workplaces, but nor is it our job to deal with it, to solve it without support. So that's why when it comes to feminist librarianship, believe either sex, any gender has such an important part to play. As I paraphrase the author David Mitchell at the end of Cloud Atlas within feminist librarianship, yes, we're all just a drop in the ocean, yet what is any ocean but a multitude of drops? And that spirit is very much in evidence in the fact that feminist librarianship is a collective endeavour. There are 18 chapters, well over 20 contributors, 20 women practitioners, and a couple of allies, and well over double that if we count interviewees and inspirations. And this is just to give you a brief flavour of what some of the chapters are like. So we have Safe and Seen in the School Library, Pamela McLean's chapter. It's like choosing a favourite amongst your children. I'm not prepared to do it, but Pamela's is such a strong offering. She's looking at attachment theory through a feminist lens to really evidence something that we say all the time, that the school library offers a safe space to our young people, but actually thinking neurologically, thinking emotionally of how children need to re-regulate in order to be able to learn, in order to be able to digest what they're taking in via school, and therefore the trusted space of the school library, but crucially the school librarian has a unique role to play in this. Misinformation. I think there's many a pun, many a strong title for our chapters. But I think Jill Ryan's takes a biscuit there, and all about intentionally inclusive practices in a library partnership in Perth in Scotland. World-changing work. This is something I will be touching on a little later on. Green libraries is a particular passion of mine, and the ecofeminism that is in evidence in our sector is really something to celebrate. Emily Monroe. She was actually an interviewee for my ecofeminism chapter, and we had such a wide-ranging conversation. I invited her back to write Why Ethical AI Can't Be Left to the Tech Bros. So we have past, present, and very much the future of feminist librarianship. And as I say, we really do have allyship in action as well. More Than One Way to Be a Man, co-authored by Sean McNamara, the CALC director, and very well known to the CALC audience by now, Cavan Stafford, who of course also appears in the book raffle, has also hosted a session as part of the conference. So please also do check out Cavan's facet title too. So at the core, you've seen the diversity of content that's in with the book, the diversity of sectors that are represented. But if you take one thing away, now I hope you'll take more than one thing away, but the advocacy angle at the heart of the book is that I know from my role reporting to the CALC Trustee Board that as a profession we are approximately 75% women, and women also make up the majority of library patrons. So, with us in this position, I believe it's time to recognise the long-standing reciprocal link that exists between libraries and our empowerment. And really, at its heart, the book evidences the case that investment in libraries is an investment in women. Now, conversely, that means cuts and closures of the sort that we see proposed by decision makers all too often, the epitome of a false economy. It is not just misguided, and the impact it's going to have on people and professionals, I would say it is misogynistic. And it's been really, really heartening to see this advocacy angle being embraced within and indeed beyond the sector. And it also raises really interesting questions of something that the Booker Prize-winning author Eleanor Catton has articulated beautifully about that there's a distinction between value and worth. And I'm sure many of you can empathise with this. It can feel really bittersweet when we're doing library advocacy that we have to put what we offer in the language of pounds and pence, because that's not where, certainly, I don't think any of us are in it for the money. It's hearts as well as heads, but decision makers, they often seem to speak in that economic language. So, many of you will be familiar with social impact analysis, converting what libraries bring into those tangible economic benefits. So, for instance, we know that through tackling social isolation, through making partnership work possible for helping communities access health information in non-clinical, non-commercial settings, the libraries save NHS England almost 30 million a year and an additional 3.2 million in Scotland. So through that social impact analysis, we know that every pound invested in libraries generates a return in social value of 6.95. 6.95 that community gets back. Now, thanks to the feminist economist Emma Holton, I now know that for every pound invested in banking, £7 in social value is lost. And this, you can see it from Instagram on the left here, in the image that I was lucky enough to have an opinion piece in the bookseller sharing this, and it's as close as we've ever gone at CALC to going viral. I don't know whether it was hatred of banks, love of libraries, perhaps a bit of both, but this message is really resonating with our patron communities in their most diverse sense. And as I state in the introduction to Feminist Librarianship, whether we choose to prioritise economics or ethics, financial backing for our libraries and the women who work in them adds up. So I've introduced a bit of an advocacy angle already there. So for our second section, something I would love to discuss with you is what I call bloody brilliant libraries. Now, this is, again, the really unique role that I see our sector playing in what I call menstrual and menopause literacy. And again, this applies to both sides of the library desk. Now, I know hopefully some of you are able to access the meeting chat box. So as a bit of a bloody brilliant icebreaker, let's take literally 1 minute. And please share in the chat if you can, if you've got capacity, any euphemism for periods that you can think of, any euphemisms that you have heard for menstruation in your personal or in your professional life. And I'll just keep an eye in the chat. I can see some coming through already. On the blob, time of the month, the red dawn. Chums, oh, that's a new one. Shark Week, yes, a lot of Jaws symbolism in periods. On the rag, oh, ketchup time, time of the money, Dracula's lunch. These are very vivid. Anti-flow painters are in. Yeah, an awful lot of antis appear. Auntie Irma confused me. Having the painters in Hell Week. I mean, I think we've all been there. The curse, yes, monthlies, antivas, bad times galore. Fallen to the communists. They will be appearing in the next slide. Niagara Falls. Oh my, the gates of hell. Oh my goodness, everybody, you're doing us proud. In that minute, chocolate craving week. I mean, that's just, hashtag facts matter. Louise, I respect that. I can empathise. Thank you so much. That was bloody brilliant set of responses. And yeah, it's a playful exercise. And I think if I pop over to this next slide, some of the suggestions, the ideas that came up when I was researching this chapter, I think you've captured a whole range of them. So yeah, we have Crimson Wave, On the Rag, that definitely appeared on the blob, time of the month. Shark Week, yes, as I say, painting the town red sounds almost fun. Code Red, if you're more in the kind of James Bond mode. Riding the Cotton Unicorn, that was in Barnett's book, period. Particularly vivid again. Tummy Trouble, very euphemistic. Jam Sandwich, we'll move quickly on. Anti-Flo is in town, as I say, a lot of female relatives. Now, Arsenal are playing at home. I got to be honest, as a Scot, this was sort of lost in me. Sean at Silips has reliably informed me that Aberdeen are playing at home would be the equivalent, but please do chip in if you're joining us from one of the other nations of Silip or indeed anywhere else around the world, what your local equivalent of this would be. The English are coming. This amused me greatly. Apparently, I believe this might be a euphemism for periods in France. There's certainly it's quite colonially coded. Really, I think anywhere that the redcoats appeared in history. So why we don't have this in Scotland, I don't know. And last but certainly not least, as we heard before, communists in the funhouse. So yeah, it's a playful activity, and thank you for playing along so wholeheartedly. But it makes a serious point that there is a fog of mis and disinformation surrounding menstrual matters that women are having to navigate in our personal and professional lives. And the toxicity of this, really, when we are in the business, when we have the vocation for accurate language, for evidence-based information, that this fog, I mean, at best it's mockery, at worst it's cruelty to just part people from the information, the health information, no less, that they need in a language that's accessible for them. We have everything but the truth here. I think we have a lot of colourful and creative language, but it shows what our patron communities are having to navigate when actually they just want some bloody good sense when it comes to menstrual and menopause literacy. So thank you for playing along, everybody. And speaking quite literally of language and our profession's role in supporting users to navigate its nuances and complexities, I'm going to briefly, and it will be brief because I'm very conscious, I love the peak librarian timekeeping at CALC, on what can feel like interminable debates about the right language to use with the right audience at the right time when it comes to menstrual literacy. Now, as is probably already apparent to you, I'm a pretty broad brushstrokes feminist. I think whenever we split hairs within the movement, whenever we argue amongst ourselves, the patriarchy continues unchecked. They're the ones that really prosper. And above all, I never seek to silence a fellow feminist because she's expressing herself in a different way to me. So really, I just want to acknowledge and create space for you to contemplate the fact that if you're engaging, beginning, continuing your menstrual and menopause literacy work in your libraries, there are likely to be circumstances where you face differences in terminology. Now, I think quite often you'll just intuitively tailor your language according to your target audience. One example from within the book that might be relevant here is a very cool case study I cite about boxer short style period pants for trans men crafted in sustainable cotton, no less, that were made available by the Period Library at University of Dundee. But even in a general sense, in a broader sense, be aware that you might find colleagues, communities, and stakeholders using different language when ultimately we're all pursuing the same aims. So that could be some people will use phrases like people with periods in all cases, and others will foreground language of women and girls. I'm sure most people here are familiar with the CILIP ethical framework, our professional commitment to human rights, to intellectual freedom, and to continuity of access to information. So interlinking them all, my main advice would be to assume good faith and actually embrace the plurality even that exists within this space in language and in opinion by anybody who really cares enough to engage with this work in the first place. As I've found, and be happy to elaborate on this later, there's quite a difference between being an author and an editor, and actually I'd say the latter role is much more akin to what we do as librarians in bringing a whole range of different opinions, different takes together. Having said that, personally speaking, to articulate why I make the language choices I do as an author and as a keynote, which, as I say, is a totally different task to harmonising a range of voices as an editor, I'm going to turn to the words of that iconic living legend, the feminist Gloria Steinem. Her essay, If Men Could Menstruate, if you haven't come across it, it is a bloody brilliant read. And as you can see here, she jokes about this is my quote from Feminist Librarianship citing the essay. She jokes about a marketplace flooded with prestige products like Paul Newman maxi pads, and I think the equivalent today might be Timothy Chalamet tampons, jostling jocks priding themselves on a 5-day flow, and conservative politicians using menstruation as justification for why we women are natural subordinates. As Steinem puts it, logic has nothing to do with oppression. And she highlights that this stigma that we've already seen through that exercise that we're already starting to discuss here today, it is not it's not really about periods at all. It's not about a squeamishness about blood. Indeed, think about the 10 o'clock news, think about video games, think about all the ways in which in social media we are encountering quite violent content day in, day out. It's not a squeamishness about blood. I would suggest, following on from Steinem's insights, it's a squeamishness about womanhood. It's misogynistic and it's historically rooted in the hatred and fear-fueled oppression of women. And this links to actually a broader point I do my best to make with language throughout the book, certainly when I'm speaking my own voice. So referring to herstory rather than history, calling it the mistress rather than master document, which amused the Facet team greatly, and discussing my authoresses and calling myself the editress rather than always the male equivalent, to really reinforce the point that Steinem's making here, that male is not and ought not be considered default or neutral. And of course, neutrality, I know I'm preaching to the choir here when I say neutrality within the profession and beyond it is such a contested term. So that's why personally I would shy away on the whole from language like we see in this infamous Lancet cover, that historically the anatomy and physiology of bodies with vaginas have been neglected. Now, we might well, I'm sure there's people in the room that would object to, I think, the dehumanizing quality of that, putting anatomy before humanity. But most importantly for me, it genuinely feels inaccurate. Again, thinking about the suppression of menstrual matters, it's not about the vaginas. And to be honest, you'd think doctors would have been able to say vulva in the first place, but it is about the women involved. And that's why you've heard it a lot already today. I do mention women as much as possible in the book and especially just in life in general, in personal and professional practice. And yet returning to the point I made earlier about assuming good faith, it wouldn't be fair of me to not include the actual full text of the tweet here. You can see the Lancet periods on display and it's all about tackling menstrual shame. So I've got no doubt whatsoever that although it's not the language I would personally use, it is done in good faith, it's well intentioned, and it's a sincere effort to tackle the stigma that we're all about combating. And so stimulating while these debates can be, and indeed we can continue them if we've got time during the Q&A, and it will definitely come up in your patron communities as menstrual and menopause literacy work goes on. I think it's never worth stalling these activities because the work is so urgently needed. So in summary, if in doubt, I would always recommend grounding yourself in our profession's ethical principles, welcoming multiple voices and perspectives so that this work is truly co-created in ways that empower your library community. And somewhere that this is happening day in, day out, that empowerment and that co-creation is one of my key case studies within Bloody Brilliant Libraries, the Sir Alex Ferguson Library at Glasgow Caledonian University. So this is quite a unique space because, yes, it's open to students and staff, but it's also dedicated to the common good, so public patrons can also access it. And it features on a beautiful Relax and Renew wellbeing space, which is home to their Women's Health Fair, to Menopause Cafe, and actually I added the picture on the left. This was literally yesterday. They invited me into the Women's Health Fair, took place yesterday, to share feminist librarianship. And again, you can see the ripple of CALC, this has been happening for a number of years now, and just year in, year out, more people attend, there are more stalls, there's more knowledge sharing. It's beautiful to see. So I was lucky enough to interview three Sir Alex Ferguson Library colleagues, Julie, Sylvia and Kimberly, for my chapter. And I think their insights, they're so rich for anybody that's wanting to bring menstrual literacy and menopause literacy into their own library space. And I'm going to highlight this quote from Julie because I think it's really supportive. Again, harking back to that point about co-creation, you don't need to do it all. The last thing I want is that menstrual and menopause literacy to be another thing on an already very long to-do list. So Julie highlights that their awareness that whilst they could certainly offer space to facilitate conversations, the library staff aren't necessarily health experts. They didn't always have the knowledge for when people are disclosing what can be very personal, intimate information. And yet there are other professionals in the university, in the wider learning ecosystem, well placed to help, and they could use Relax and Renew, use that wellbeing space to promote resources. And as Julie articulates here, having these activities sit alongside or actually be in an area where you're also studying, you're also researching, lets you have the opportunity to access resources that you may not even realise, you may not even know you need. So that's really the beauty of the space we offer, the trusted relationships. You don't need to do it all. So often perfect is the enemy of good. And there will be people in your wider ecosystem who also have things to offer that can contribute to menstrual and menopause activities. So let's again turn to the chat box if we can, if you've got the capacity. Let's reflect on safe spaces. So this was something that came up in quite unexpected ways in my conversations with the Sir Alex Ferguson Library team. Thinking about their menopause cafe, where to situate it, how to make that happen for patrons. Please do share in the chat box any thoughts you have about what defines, what makes a safe space. I mean, it might be worth even bearing in mind what I mentioned earlier about Pamela's research into the school library and what makes that a safe space. If you think about a safe space that you access, what really makes that resonate for you? Thank you, everybody. Trust, yeah, absolutely. Respect, very much so. And it's interesting that these are, yeah, it's conceptual as well as practical. A space without shame, the capacity to call out unsafe actions and behaviour, support other people like me, accountability, sincerity, absolutely. These are all brilliant. Somewhere where you can be yourself completely. Absolutely, this is beautifully. Autonomy as well, yeah, there's no one size fits all. Belonging, inclusivity, absolutely. And I think if I'd asked, what is the perfect library like, I think the same adjectives, the same descriptors would fast be coming through. So here are some of the ideas that come when we're thinking, yeah, when we're thinking about what emerged in the Sir Alex Ferguson conversation. But this is just the start, not the end of what this would look like in your own space. So yeah, I think accessibility as well in its most holistic sense. Things like, what are our public transport options? Is that clear to patrons who will be attending? Accessible toilets. And again, thinking about inclusivity in its most meaningful sense. In an ideal world, we'd have period products and all. One of my interviewees at Bloody Good Period, Heather, made the brilliant point that actually, if you think of an accessible bathroom, it also has its own sink. Now, if we're turning to things like moon cups, menstrual cups that we want to rinse out and access that way, it really makes a difference if we've got accessible facilities. I think support with childcare is also something that emerges, not least because even if it's a menopause cafe, firstly, it's going to be relevant to all ages, but also increasing numbers of us have intergenerational caring responsibilities and they're very practical concerns like control over temperature. Again, what autonomy actually looks like in a very different kind of embodied sense as well. Thank you, everybody. These ideas are brilliant. And if you're interested in starting a menopause cafe in your library, exploring this, it could be in your staff group, it could be with your patrons, it could be a mix of both, then a brilliant resource, you can scan the QR code to access it or go on the website, is that of Alliance Health and Social Care Alliance Scotland, their Conversation Cafe Toolkit supports Scotland's Women's Health Plan, and you can see even what comes to mind when you hear the term menopause. So there's no leading questions. It is a safe space. That's just one icebreaker amongst many, but creating a forum where women can speak about their concerns, speak about their experiences, positive as well as negative, and yeah, access trusted information in a trusted setting, which of course our libraries offer to our patrons each and every day. So I'll share resources in a minute, and the slides, of course, have already been circulated, but do check this out if you're interested in a menopause cafe of the sort that the Sir Alex Ferguson is already doing in such a fantastic way. So something else that surprised me when I was researching my chapter, to be honest, is what I call the policy paradox. So you might be familiar with things like menopause policies, menstrual leave policies. These are appearing in workplaces around the world. And I would assume that this was an unmitigated good thing. And in some circumstances it can be, but what we see in the research is that if it's not accompanied by wider, more holistic cultural change, then actually it's often women ourselves who are saying, well, actually, I don't necessarily want this. This could well make my life harder, not easier. You can see that really in the sober quote from Target and Beck research. A woman expressing her concern about having a dedicated menopause policy at work. There's enough bias against older women without giving the guys an excuse to justify their assumed superiority. So why, again, why libraries are such an important space for this work to be driven forward? Because yes, we have policy, we have legislation, we have statutory duties in many cases, but we also represent culture. We also facilitate and catalyze cultural change, and we need both. And when it's something that, particularly when it comes to menopause, involves gendered ageism to the extent that it does. There is now a British standard on menstruation, menopause and menstrual health, and it notes that these fears can be compounded for freelance workers, those on 0 hours contracts or fixed term contracts. And indeed, as we know, that's all too many of our library colleagues are in that position. So you're unlikely to advocate for yourself, to feel empowered to advocate for yourself if it's not accompanied by, yes, legislative change, policy change, but also cultural transformation. And a world expert on this, who I was delighted to speak to as part of my chapter, is Professor Kat Riech. She is, as I say, a global expert on menopause matters. She led the development of that British standard. She's now working on the international standard from the University of Glasgow Adam Smith Business School. And she highlights, which again is a message that I really hope you'll be able to take away from today, there is no one best way of doing it. That applies to feminist librarianship as a whole, and particularly to menstrual and menopause literacy. Kat notes that she looks at workplaces around the world, and what she sees is that some are great and some have specific policies. Some are great and don't even mention menopause. It's part of a more holistic well-being approach, and it's more about a supportive culture. But crucially, Kat notes, whether it's top down or bottom up, resources have to be put into it. Allies and champions can do an amazing job for organisations, but we should not be relying on the individual. She thinks as a business expert, we should not have a single point of failure, and that emotional load should not be on women who are perhaps dealing with this personally as well as professionally. It's something that we can all advance, and that we want it to be understood as a workplace issue, not just as a personal issue. So again, thinking back to that advocacy argument that I was making at the beginning of feminist librarianship, there is such a strong economic case to be made for this work. And I think that also applies here. If we want to support our patron communities and our professional communities, the menstrual and menopause literacy, like the rest of feminist librarianship, it adds up, and it adds up when we all roll up our sleeves and get involved. So these are some of the resources that I've cited for this section. The slides are available, and happy to share further, and you will find an extensive reading list in the chapter if you are lucky enough to win it in the raffle, or if you borrow it from your library. Both options very, very encouraged. So earlier on, I mentioned that green libraries is something I care about deeply, and I was so excited to explore this in the book through world-changing work, which is that chapter title, and about ecofeminism that's literally and figuratively rooted in our libraries. So one of the sources I turned to for this was the grandmother, let's call her, of ecofeminism, the first woman to coin this term, Françoise de Bon. Now, if I tell you the title in English of her iconic 1974 book is Feminism or Death, you're going to get the sense that our Françoise she's not messing around, okay? It's full on. And actually she calls men non-women as part of that. So it's very 70s coded. And I'm not going to lie, I think some of her approach is a tad too essentialist for modern day taste, but you can see here it's very hard-hitting intervention into what ecofeminism means and the necessity of ecofeminism in our world. If it was necessary in the 1970s, my goodness, is it necessary today? So she notes that if male society persists as it is, there will be no tomorrow for humanity. A culture of women would never have been this extermination of nature, the systematic destruction with maximum profit in mind of all the nourishing resources. Now, again, that might sound too essentialist, but the evidence bears it out. We know that in the Western world alone, women use 22% less energy than men, yet 80% of those globally displaced by climate change are women. And controlling for other variables, countries with higher levels of female political representation adopt better, more effective climate change policies. So return to the stats that I shared right at the beginning. The women make up the majority of library professionals and of library patrons. This means that when it comes to the climate crisis, our libraries, as I note in the chapter, unite those most at risk from inadequate environmental action with those statistically best equipped to be climate decision makers. And it's articulated beautifully by Alison Nolan, one of my interviewees. She is the CEO of the Scottish Library and Information Council, and in her previous role at Inverclyde Libraries, she led one of Scotland's 2 climate beacons during COP26. She highlights that women have long been leaders in grassroots resistance to environmental harm, certainly not out of abstract ideology, but from lived necessity. Now, those of you who are interested in climate action will likely have come across 2 terms, climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So mitigation is what we talk about when we're thinking about strategies to reduce our emissions in the first place. So reducing our carbon footprint, that kind of is the stuff that very often makes the headlines. And I'm going to be honest, when I first heard the term climate adaptation, I was quite hostile to it. I was quite reticent because it feels like the last thing we should be adapting to. But in fact, it means quite the opposite. It means recognizing that we need to redraw our world. As I mentioned in the chapter, it's the opposite of greenwashing. It's not greenwashing the industries and corporations that have historically and to the present day been most complicit in climate change, but restructuring the ways we live, work and spend so that social capital, again going back to economics, but also so much more, social capital in every sense is more justly and thoughtfully distributed. So that is really what climate adaptation means. It means that as I'm sure I don't need to sort of doomsay the climate crisis for anybody here, but we know that our world is going to be changing within our lifetime. We need to adapt. But does that adaptation, much as we wish it wasn't the case, does it actually offer an opportunity to challenge much of the injustice that caused the climate crisis in the first place? And what is the role of women? What is the role of our libraries in that? So again, let's turn to the chat. And this can be ongoing, so there's no rush, but I'm really interested if you can, bring a woman to mind. It could be yourself, it could be a friend, family, colleague, patron, the list goes on. And just imagine spending a day in her footsteps. Take a moment or so. So think, where does that woman need to get to in a day? What errands does she run? What jobs does she need to do for herself and for her others, paid and unpaid work? How does she? Indeed, how could she get to the places she needs to visit? Is she alone? Is she accompanied by dependents? Does she have caring responsibilities, either children or elderly? And does the city, the town, the village, the infrastructure of where she lives, does it help or does it hinder her? So I know it's a big question, but do just please share your responses, share your thoughts if anything comes to mind. And while we're contemplating it, I thought I'd just share some of the images. Now, I very sincerely, when I was drawing together these slides, I was just searching Canva, Pexels, you name it, women in travel, women on journeys, women in transport. And I was hoping for stuff that would genuinely illustrate the point that I'm making here. And instead, we get this highly Instagrammable but ultra unrealistic set of images. And it was quite shocking. So I thought I'm just going to share it with you as well, that this is literally what comes up when we search for women in transport, women and the environment. So, I mean, yeah, on the right, much as I love coordinating my outfit to anything, it's not necessary. We have this poor puzzled lady looking at her map. For the non-drivers, the centre image is very much not how you drive a car. We have a very stiletto disembarking of what looks like a private jet. So, you know, we love to see a girl boss, but not really a realistic impression of what travel, what transport, what navigating transport infrastructure looks like for most women. And yeah, on the left, do not try this at home. However pretty your sundress is, we really don't want to see you at the edge of a cliff like this. So it just goes to show the kind of stereotypes that abound about women's literal inhabiting of the world. And for me, when I walk through, you know, the women in my life and think about how they navigate the world, it's, you know, our transport infrastructure, it's still very much drawn along patriarchal lines. So for me, we have the Phillips office in the city centre of Glasgow, and I'm travelling along a Victorian train route from the suburb to the city centre and back again. I might as well have my umbrella, my bowler hat, and my briefcase. And yet, many women I know, if they're domestic workers, if they're carers, they're not going from suburb to city and back again. They're going from suburb to suburb. They're going on multiple buses. They might be bringing children of different ages with them, having to pay multiple times for the same route, having to pay for dependents, having to navigate with pushchairs, with wheelchairs. It's quite a different world. And yeah, I'm just seeing, Yeah, it was noting that there was analysis with the Nordic city, and they analysed women's needs and whether transport infrastructure worked. It led to change. Yeah, I think actually that might appear in a book I'm going to cite in a moment. Um, so you can see here, yeah, the question of who actually has, when we're thinking about climate adaptation, who has the on-the-ground insight to gauge what works and what doesn't in a local community, building their expertise, yes, through paid work, through lived experience, but not just that, through multiple modes of caring for what who are very often that community's most vulnerable residents. Very often it is women. Now, linking back to the subject of today, where is the only freely accessible source of trustworthy climate adaptation information in that women's area? Where fuses that local know-how with national and even international resource reach? Shout out if you know it. It is her library. So our libraries, again, are playing an absolutely key role in offering adaptation information and offering support. We're already so often a community hub for climate action. And I think ecofeminism is very often the key to how this will really work for our communities. So yeah, I can see book recommendations already coming in the chat. That's amazing. Thank you, everybody. And I would definitely recommend Leslie Kearns' Feminist City because she outlines exactly this. You know, women are paying a kind of misogynistic premium for accessing transport networks, transport infrastructure that very often was not designed with us in mind. Libraries are the secret weapon against that, the non-clinical, non-commercial space within a community. Public libraries, at least we know that our patrons do have the statutory right to public library access. And this is why it's so important, whether they're turning to us for information, whether they're turning to us as warm or cool spaces as the climate crisis really reaches a crunch point, we have an absolutely key role to play here. And ultimately, as I summarise in the chapter, however much we wish it had not come at such a cost to our planet, climate adaptation is about the understanding that climate action offers us a challenging yet necessary opportunity to reassess and redesign society. In essence, to confront the elements that cause much of the climate crisis in the first place. And again, I think Alison summarised this so beautifully in our interview, and you will find this in the book as well. It's worth really delving into her insights. That there's a valuable advocacy opportunity. Again, turning right back to what I shared at the beginning, there's an advocacy opportunity in recognising how much of this work is being led by women. It not only highlights libraries' environmental contributions, but also reframes us as models of inclusive, forward-thinking leadership. Our profession, which is already rich in women leaders, not least Ali herself, is evolving towards flatter, more participatory structures that reflect feminist and sustainable values, collaboration, care, adaptability, and equity. And by showcasing how women are driving climate action within libraries, we can strengthen our overall advocacy message, not just as institutions preserving knowledge, but as active agents of social and environmental transformation. So that, to me, is what ecofeminism looks like in libraries. It's already happening in libraries and deserves celebrating, deserves supported as a result. So here again are some references. If you haven't encountered the new age of sexism, it's a tough read, but it's a very valuable read. And actually, how the AI revolution is reinventing misogyny, I'd highly recommend that. I think your patrons would find it very sobering reading as well, not least because when we think about the environmental impact of AI and how much AI is misogynistically coded, whether that is the soft end of all the assistance robots being female named, female voice, to the kind of deep fake end, how much energy we're burning, as Laura Bates puts it, to satisfy misogynistic fantasies, and therefore where our capital, where our social capital in every sense can be better placed. There's Francois Dubon. It was actually only translated into English in 2022, so there's been quite a gap, but that also means there's really interesting critical reflection on what she shares. And Leslie Kearns, absolutely cannot praise this book highly enough. And Not Too Late. This is a really uplifting, positive, edited collection. So it can be overwhelming. The climate anxiety, the climate grief can be very real for us as professionals, but also for our patrons. So that is a feminism-infused collection that I would definitely recommend. And there are even more in Feminist Librarianship itself. So I think we're just a little bit off the hour. So I'm going to pause in a moment. I would really welcome your reflections on menstrual literacy, on ecofeminism libraries, any examples that you have that I don't know about yet, whether there'll be ever a FemLib too. I want to know them. We want to celebrate them through Winspiration, what you're doing. But for anybody who isn't lucky in the raffle, so yeah, hang on till closing remarks this afternoon. But if you would like to acquire a copy for your library or for yourself and you haven't yet done so and you're not lucky in the raffle this time, then the code Women50 Facet are very excited, very thrilled to see both books, actually, myself and Cavan, playing such a key part in the conference. So please do use that code Women50 for 50% off. And above all, remember the core rallying cry at the heart of feminist librarianship, wherever it manifests in the UK and around the world. Investment in libraries is an investment in women. So thank you so much for listening, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing now and come back to the room. And if there are any questions, then I'd love to take them. And I am mighty relieved that I haven't put that spectacular time management awry. Thank you, everybody. Really, really excited to hear your thoughts, hear your examples, hear your reflections on what feminist librarianship looks like to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kirsten. I've set it so that people can unmute yourselves, but if you could raise your hand first, if you do want to ask a question vocally, or do pop it into the chat, and either me or Michelle will pick it out of the chat.
Thanks, everybody. I can see a lot of climate insights as well, so that's brilliant about, what lighting looks like in communities. And yeah, actually, with that past inequality impact assessment, Louise, that's really interesting, saying that you touched on library spaces being designed by men for men to the detriment of women who are disproportionately likely to be working in those spaces. And yeah, traveling with a partner and kids, managing all the belongings. And the joke that these are the images of a woman traveling when we're, juggling 50,000 bags is the feel of it. Yeah, and also noting that horror, getting on the bus, realizing that sole buggy space is full because it's so tiring. So yeah, thank you, everybody. Really interested in any questions.
Since we are talking about feminist librarianship, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in here and just say someone has put on the wall of thanks a post saying thanks to Darren and Emma. And I just found it quite ironic because my name's Michelle. If you were referring to me, my name is Michelle. I am the co-founder and co-host, co-organizer of CALC. It is not just Darren, but just found that quite ironic since we were talking about feminist librarianship. So if that was you, please go back and correct your contribution. Yeah, just wanted to jump in and say that because it's really annoyed me. But yeah, sorry. If anyone's got any questions, please do jump in for Kirsten.
Well, I think that's a really valuable point and actually self-advocacy in action, Michelle. And hopefully the person will be able to jump on and edit that. And it's something that actually we discuss in the Phillips team as well. So we've got Sean, myself and Leah. And it was always the joke that at the end of our conference, when it was just Sean and me, when we were a team of two, very often people would say thanks to Sean and team. I think the team c'est moi. It is funny that it happens. And yeah, so that's great if they've got the capacity to go on and adjust that and good on you for articulating that in such a clear yet self-supportive and community supported way. I can see Ashley popped in the chat, like, we'd love to see Not Our Job filter down more to school libraries. I suspect there might have been an uptick in sexual harassment of female library staff in the 5 years. This is such an important point, Ashley, and actually I did a webinar with 4 of my authoresses on Monday for School Libraries Group. So please do ping me an email or contact them and they will be sharing that recording in a couple of weeks because it's definitely something that emerges in the book. We have Pamela McLean, as I say, her Safe Spaces chapter, and Pamela really engages with this. And as you say, we cannot assume that feminist progress is linear, and that I would completely agree that there's some very worrying trends in recent years. And Anais, she is a librarian as well and talks about a project called Lighting Up Lives, which was Renfrewshire and Glasgow school librarians, and actually about tackling toxic masculinity and going back to the spirit of not our job, that it not being women's job to solve this. So bringing in male authors, bringing in male voices, reinforcing the idea that jobs for the boys. Do you know what? Actually, offering alternatives to toxic masculinity amongst role models is very much a job for the boys, I would say. So that recording and definitely checking out the school library chapters within FemLib, I think that would be for you. I would love to reinvigorate Not Our Job. Obviously, it's been a few years and I've been busy with the book, but it's something that sadly has not gone away. So we could absolutely pick up that conversation after the session and think about that even whether for this November for the 16 days of activism or going forward, because it's sobering but sadly not surprising to realise how much of a concern this is for our school library colleagues. And
I can
Juliet,
see.
oh
Oh, go on.
sorry,
You go
Darren,
ahead.
if you can
Yeah, we
same one.
jumped in at the same time. You go ahead. You've read it.
I'm so I'm so trained from Phillips. I can't put my feet up and actually not do. Thank you. So yeah, Julia, asking, do you believe that any particular library sector is implementing feminist librarianship more effectively than others, who those sectors can look at for guidance? What a brilliant question. Let me just cogitate on that for a moment. There's certainly a real diversity of sectors within the book. And again, it's like choosing favourites amongst your children. I don't want to do it's like who's going to get the buggy space? I can't do it. But I would say it looks quite different according to different sectors. I think public libraries are doing much more than not only do they get credit for, but they realize they credit themselves for. So again, even like up in Scotland, having the statutory duty to provide period products, that this is amazing around the world. This is so valuable, and also the way that teams are reflecting on how to do that in the most stigma tackling way. Equally, though, I think academic libraries are a really exciting place. I can see conceptually and in terms of the conversations and in terms of, again, going back to the example of the Sir Alex Ferguson, the role that they play within the wider university, within the wider organisational ecosystem. That's really, really valuable. And I think they're a great case in point, as the slide with Julie's quote articulated, that we don't need to do it all in order to do something. And we have a really unique offer in our own right. So yeah, I would struggle I feel like if I pick a sector, I'll no sooner log off than I'll be like, I should have picked another. But you'll certainly find a whole range within the book. And once you've read it, please do get back to me if there's one that does seem to be leafing out. And I think for everything I just said about school libraries, there's definitely huge appetite and huge enthusiasm. Maybe that's why, because they're at the sharp end of new trends in toxic masculinity, but really, really strong enthusiasm, strong energy for feminist practice. So it would be very much a first amongst equals situation. I'm sorry if that's too broad an answer, but you will find all these sectors represented within the book, and I would be really intrigued to hear your thoughts as well.
I had a question because I'm interested, particularly in your perspective as somebody who is both within the library sector but is also a writer. What do you think libraries and librarians can do to better support women writers and I'm guessing and feminist presses particularly?
Mm. I mean, I think libraries already do so much, to be quite frank, in terms of thinking about feminist presses, feminist voices, smaller presses. And quite often they're a secret weapon because it's been a tough few years in publishing. And it, of course, the collateral damage of that is very often historically underrepresented voices. I think, again, going back to our ethical framework and what drives our work, I think that aligns so perfectly with feminist writing in all its guises. So, yeah, championing intellectual freedom, championing access to information, not just thinking, publishers. Of course, that's their job, but they do have a commercial lens on things. They're thinking, is this going to sell enough to be worth being front list, being in the shop window, whereas we have a very different remit and we're all about the public benefit. And so I think even recognizing that, I mean, there are practical things, even like getting the message out there about the public lending right. I think certainly in public libraries, we used to find that our patrons were not aware of that. And it's like a really nice way to show that you are supporting writers, that if you want to experiment, if you want to try a women's voice that you haven't heard before, if there's a title like Feminism or Death that sounds kind of challenging, but you're intrigued, borrowing it from your library is such a great way to, yeah, enrich your own experience, but enrich that women author as well. So I think there's so much brilliant work already going on, quite frankly. And as a woman author myself, I could not feel more supported by the library sector. I feel like they just embrace you with open arms. So I think do what you're doing and yeah, just be as loud as possible about it, quite frankly. Um, and Nicole, so saying, how does intersectionality and privilege within feminist librarianship play a role in any or all of the efforts they've talked about today? How do we account for the additional labour and cognitive load of being marginalised in other ways? Absolutely, that's such an important point, Nicole. And there's one chapter in particular, well, there's a number in which these are key cross currents, but one that's immediately coming to mind is interviews on imposter syndrome, actually. And bear with me here. So, because actually what we do is a good bit of myth busting about imposter syndrome itself. So this is one of two chapters authored by Leah Higgins, my colleague at CALC. She played the role of new professional advisor in the book. So really my kind of eyes and ears as to what new professionals needed from it. And as one of many other strings to her bow, she produces the CALC podcast. So that episode, I can go and grab the link in a moment. You can read along the chapter. The chapter became a podcast episode, so you can read it with your ears as well as your eyes. But the reason I mention it is because this was definitely something that came up. And actually, we realised that what is often medicalised as imposter syndrome is a very valid, very legitimate response to being told that we don't belong in spaces. And of course, that's compounded by these intersections of identity. So somebody who is incredibly articulate on this is Amina Shah, the National Librarian of Scotland. She very generously wrote the foreword to Feminist Librarianship. And she talks about how actually that sense, you know, she has, as not only the first woman to hold this role, but as the first person of biracial heritage to hold this role, there's been a lot on her shoulders. And you're exactly right, Nicole. You know, it's a bittersweet celebration when you think the additional labour of that, rather than just being celebrated in her own right, we have to celebrate that when the library has been going for 101 years, and it's taken this long. So that conversation, I think, would really interest you. It is a conversation, you'll see lots of different voices coming into it, but actually what many of the women gravitate towards is, I think, that historic exclusion. Amina puts it as, in a funny way, it can be a superpower because we can then extend that to, we understand what it is to not belong, and therefore we know for patrons who are underserved, who feel like the library isn't for them, we are the ones who can empathise and can understand and design collections and services and programmes that are genuinely going to be of support. But this very much comes up, and actually, funnily enough, it comes up in Leah's other chapter as well, which is about the history of librarianship, because she set to work researching, thinking it would be a classic research project to find the history of women in our profession. And in fact, what she found is what she calls negative space as an art historian. So the way that women's stories have historically been marginalised, of course, compounded depending on what your identity is and those intersections. These are really sobering reads, but really, really valuable reads. Because it is additional labour. I mean, even that, to be quite frank, speaking from a personal perspective, it's been additional labour to bring the book together. I almost don't want to be lovely as it is to celebrate it. It's like we're only here now in 2026. And why is this following to me? Why is this not happening? And of course, you know, I've not like world's tiny violin there, but it is a point that sometimes when you recognise where we are, it shows, yes, where we've come, but also how far we still have to go. So these are all sorts of conversations that are threaded through the book. There are no easy answers, but it's definitely something that was front of mind for a number of contributors and a number of interviewees as well. Oh, Emma, thank you for sharing a period positive. It's about bloody time. Yes, it is. Brilliant free content when funds are short. Thank you, folks. Oh, thank you. Ask a librarian. There's my reference right there. Yes. So if you want a sneak peek at feminist librarianship and at one of our closing chapters, that is interviews on imposter syndrome, and you can listen to the actual interviews on imposter syndrome by clicking that link. Oh, I love that, Louise. This will be your summer reading, sitting by the pool, drink in hand, this book, and I'll tell you, I wish that'd been how I'd written it, but that sounds delightful. Please do tag us in. That sounds quite the tableau.
First appearance of a cat, day three of the conference.
Oh, actually,
Excellent.
that shows how fast he was going. He's actually a Cocker Spaniel, so
Oh, right. Well, we haven't had a dog.
yeah. And there's another one. They have been my little mascots, Winnie and Shed.
Very well behaved.
For once, they pick their moments.
Excellent. Any last questions for anyone? Do feel free to raise your hand or pop something into the chat.
I can pop my email in as well, folks. So if anything does occur to you, and or if you have any projects that you would like to sort of celebrate as part of the Winspiration program, always thrilled to hear about them. So please do just send them my way. That's me, day or night. This is the stuff that's always in my head. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out.
I should say if anyone's also scrambling to put all these links together, I'll download a copy of the chat and then I'll pull all the links out and we'll put them onto the website along with the recording. So don't worry if you've missed any of the links that have been shared. We'll have them all together. Cool. I'm not seeing any other chats coming in, so um, last call if there's any last questions for Kirsten before we wrap up. Oh, there's one just coming from Juliet.
With your work encompassing the many elements of intersectional feminism, did you find it a challenge to choose specific areas, content to focus on, or did themes emerge quite naturally? That's a great question. So, I mean, it's one of these things that there were certainly some authoresses. I'm like, oh my gosh, I definitely want you. So I had lots of ideas. And as I mentioned in my conclusion, not every woman that I approached said yes or was in a position to say yes. And that is important to note in itself. You know, again, when we're thinking about emotional labour, this is in addition, this is beyond their day jobs. So I've certainly got no right to expect women to bring the generosity of research and insights. So it was quite eye-opening in terms of what academic publishing is like and the challenges that it can present. One theme that I feel doesn't emerge as strongly as I would like, and if I ever get the chance to do further work in this area, is actually that of motherhood. So we've discussed it a little bit today already in terms of navigating transport systems and the like. I'm not a mother myself, so I couldn't speak to it personally. And again, because I know most practitioners through CALC and therefore through a professional lens, it wasn't really appropriate for me to say, oh, well, you talk about your personal experiences more than was volunteered. But I think that will be one of many kind of intersections, one of many experiences that really shapes the experience of a feminist librarian. And yet it's there kind of implicitly, but I would like to, I think it would have been really interesting to have that made more explicit. So if there's ever a FemLib 2, that will definitely be something that I'll seek to commission. But on the whole, I think bearing in mind that this is the UK's first book on this theme ever, which was a shock to me as much as anybody else. So it's the start, not the end of a conversation. And it's been such a treat. I mean, I've learned a lot even from you all today and what you're sharing with me. So yeah, this continues, the work continues, and the spirit of feminist librarianship continues. Starting point here, but certainly not the end point. Oh, Louise, that's really generous. Yeah, please, that would be really interesting. Please do just ping me an email. There we are, FemLib 2 taking shape before your eyes. Facet will be thrilled.
Okay, love it. I think we are just approaching that point, which I'm terming the danger zone, which is when if a question comes in, we're not going to have a chance to answer it. So in fact, oh no, it's just a thank you. Yeah, I think we'll wrap up there. But yeah, if everybody could please express their thanks either with a reaction or in the chat for what was a really interesting, engaging, and inspiring keynote talk. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Okay, just while those final thank yous are coming through. Just to let you know, we have been recording this session, so we'll be putting this up on the website after it's been manually transcribed. Working away in the background, also, we've had our sketchnoter working away to create some really nice visuals from this talk as well. We'll be sending out a conference swag form where you can request a copy of any of the sketch notes from the conference this year. We've got a break coming up now for 15 minutes, and then we've got the first of our parallel sessions for day 3. So thank you very much, everybody, and I'll see you in 16 minutes in our first set of parallel sessions today. Thank you very much, everybody.